Hello, folks. Today we have with us Sam Daley-Harris, and he's really a pioneer in this field in the sense that he was an organizer, grassroots organizer, but he brought about really the foundations of how microfinance and microcredit got introduced into the US, with the Clintons taking interest and having one of the first meetings in 1997 with Dr. Yunus. So there's a lot more to him, and I'll talk about it. But as you know, this is a series of interviews or conversations, really, with with pioneers in the impact investing field. So welcome, Sam. How are you today?
Great to be here.
Great. So Sam, maybe you can start out telling us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and how you got interested in the issues of poverty or political organization. And how did you come across microfinance? Maybe a little bit background on that.
Well, let me just start with, I'm going to start with my story of self. And in the field of organizing, Marshall Gans at Harvard developed this. And basically, what happened in your life and what decisions did you make that got you to this commitment or got you to this moment? So this is a story of self. I probably tell it 25 times a year. And it goes like this. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music. And I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra for 12 years and taught high school music. 42 years ago, I founded the Anti-Poverty Lobby Results. And a lot of times I'm asked, music, poverty lobby, what the heck does that have to do with anything? And when I look back in my life, there are certain experiences that start pointing me in a different direction. I'm going to give a shortened version of this, but I graduated from high school in 1964 and learned around high school graduation that a fraternity brother, a year younger, had died the day before in a tractor trailer accident in Georgia. 4 years later, 1968, right around college graduation, US Senator Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And with these two deaths, both around graduation, I started asking the questions of purpose. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? But I'm slow. And it was not till 9 years later, 1977, I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger put on by the Hunger Project. And I go to this thing thinking, well, hunger's inevitable. What do I know? I'm a musician. I mean, I'm thinking it's inevitable because there are no solutions. Because I think if there were solutions, somebody would have done something by now. But I go to this thing and right away, it's obvious. There's no mystery to growing food or clean water or basic health or literacy. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I'm hopeless about human nature. People will just never get around to doing the things that can be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own. And my question, why am I here? What am I here to do? So I get involved in a big way. This is the end of the story. In 1978 and 1979, I speak to 7,000 high school students, classroom by classroom. And just before going into the first classroom, I read some statements from the US National Academy of Sciences, Food and Nutrition Study, and others calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met him, just the name. Out of 7,000 asked, 200, fewer than 3%, could answer correctly. 6,800, over 97%, didn't know who their member of Congress was. So I started this group Results in 1980 out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington on the other. And that was 1980, and I can talk a little bit more about it, but that was my journey to 5 years later, 1985, learning about microcredit and microfinance.
Wow. Okay, so that's really interesting because you can't just have an industry come about without political will and without sort of advocacy and the things that you have accomplished with Dr. Yunus and Alex Counts, and, other people like Maria Otero and all these people that really were pioneers in terms of bringing. I remember when microfinance, microcredit was not even in the, you had to explain what it was. Now, majority of the people know this. And I think the idea of coming together and forming the results, your organization,
Yeah.
and becoming familiar with microfinance and, sort of there's always a guiding hand towards the greater goal. When you make an intention to do good, I really believe that there is some support to you. So tell me a little bit more, the audience, as to in 1985, what led you to microfinance?
Okay, so it's oversimplified. We were, among other things, following Jim Grant at UNICEF. He had a vision of vaccinating all the kids in the world by 1990, et cetera. And our big lobbying campaign in 1985 was in support of IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, a small UN agency, and the US government, my government, was trying to kill IFAD in a funding squabble between OPEC and the United States. And that year, Results Volunteers generated 28 editorials, not letters to the editor, but where the newspaper wrote editorials saying, "Stop it, US, come to this agreement." And while we were lobbying on IFAD, they sent us 3 videos of 3 programs they'd invested in. Mm-hmm. And one of the videos was a Dutch documentary called NASMA about a little bank in Bangladesh with 40,000 borrowers called Grameen Bank. Mm-hmm. So we made a copy of this video and sent it at the time to our 50 chapters around the United States. And essentially, it was 1986, at the end of 86. During that year, the volunteers generated 90 editorials on vaccinating kids and tripling the Child Survival Fund. But at the end of 86 was when the legislation on microcredit was being introduced. And I want to say, this is like an aside and it maybe doesn't mean anything, but I want to talk about the 3 lead sponsors and their key aides. The lead sponsor in the House was Democrat Ed Feehan, and his chief of staff and ledge director was George Stephanopoulos. And so we were working a lot with, for those who aren't in the US, he's like a well-known news presenter type person. So we were working with George. And the Republican in the House, the lead sponsor was Ben Gilman. And different periods, he had different key aides, but at one point, his key aide on the microcredit stuff was Mark Kirk, who eventually became a congressman in Illinois and then a US senator from Illinois. And the lead sponsor, this is sort of not that important, but I think it's cool though. The lead sponsor in the Senate was Senator Dennis DeConcini of Arizona. And his key staffer on this bill, the microcredit legislation, was Tim Romer. Tim Romer later went on to be a congressman from Indiana, a member of the 9/11 Commission, and the US ambassador to India under Obama. So it was just kind of cool that you had these, forget the members of Congress, just their key aides that were working on this. But we met major resistance. A key person in the Reagan administration said the poor have neither the talent, skills, nor IQ to get out of poverty, end of quote. That was a quote in an interview in the Christian Science Monitor. but results.
Sorry, who was this, Sam? Who was this?
Well,
No, I'm not the name, but what was his position?
Well, let's just put it this way. He was in USAID, and in my book, and I'm going to refer to Reclaiming Our Democracy, Healing the Break Between People and Government. He was promoted to the head of microfinance, which was called micro enterprise development at the time by USAID. And micro enterprise development meant enterprises of 15 or more employees.
Yeah, sure.
And so that was one part of the battle. We wanted to be more self-employment rather than somebody who could hire 15 other people, but let the 15 other people, in a sense, start their own businesses. If I could, I want to read an excerpt from something that Peter Goldmark was president of the Rockefeller Foundation. He was also publisher of the International Herald Tribune, among other things. And he visited Grameen Bank, I'm going to make it up, in 1990, in the early 90s. And I believe he took investors with him. And this would have been quite a while ago. And I'm going to read a little thing that he wrote after his visit. On the day I was there, the women were sitting, reporting to a loan officer, jumping to their feet, reciting the 16 decisions or pledges. As I watched, I could see something else. I could see the smashing of ancient rules, the shattering of traditional canons. I could see subversion. Here's what was being subverted: the belief that poor people are helpless people, the belief that women are the most helpless of all, the belief that poor, landless people are terrible credit risks, the belief that the poor cannot cooperate, cannot plan ahead, cannot decide for themselves, cannot manage or service alone, the belief that a lot of credit is always better than a little credit. That's what he was seeing being demolished. The belief that the best form of economic development is aid for massive centralized projects undertaken by the state. The belief that you can build the economy by destroying the earth. He keeps going, but I think it was interesting that the then president of the Rockefeller Foundation was taking a group of, I don't know if they would have been investors yet, they were wealthy people, to visit Grameen Bank in about 1990, and coming back, writing some things like that. And I stopped early, but yeah, it was.
So Sam, this is, it's such, for the audience, it must be like just their jaws must be dropping to understand what effort it took to get to, now this, everybody's impact investing, everybody knows, all the big banks are sort of all, engaged in impact investing at various levels. But to understand that, the introduction of the idea came through your effort with Dr. Yunus and sort of bringing the legislation that really results role in it. Tell me a little bit about, the documentary NASMA, and is that still available on YouTube? Can the folks see it?
YouTube didn't exist in 1985, but it's got to be there. I've not seen it, but it's just, it was a Dutch documentary. I'm assuming it was made in 83 or something like that. And it, it was a visit to this little bank. At the time, it reported 40,000 borrowers, which was its earlier days. I want to tell this one story. During the end of 86 through the end of 87, Results Volunteers generated 100 newspaper editorials where the newspaper, the New York Times, the Atlanta Journal, the Chicago Tribune, wrote an editorial supporting the legislation. And at one point, Muhammad Yunus came to the results office. He came late, actually, and I was a little freaked out because there were these 14 editorials on a conference call. And at the end of the hour, another 14 editorial writers were on this conference call. And again, it was about microcredit. Who'd ever heard of that in 87? About this guy giving tiny loans, whoever heard of that, from a country, Bangladesh, that was not in the US in the air back then. But at the end of the first hour, one of the people on the call was not an editorial writer. She was a journalist. Her name is Kristen Helmore. And she asked if she could be on the second call also. And I said, yeah, but don't ask any of the questions. Let the new writers ask the questions first. And so she was on both calls. After the calls and other research, she wrote a 4-part series in the Christian Science Monitor on microfinance that was published, I don't even know if it was at the end of 87 or the beginning of 88. That was the article that CBS 60 Minutes read. And out of that article decided to send a crew to Bangladesh in 89 to film this segment on Grameen Bank, which wasn't aired until 1990 twice on 60 Minutes. And I would be in cabs with Eunice in New York City, and the cab driver would turn around and say, "You're that guy from India who makes the loans to the women." And I corrected the India part, but it was just in 1990, when there wasn't MSNBC and there wasn't Fox News and there wasn't whatever, being on 60 Minutes twice in 1 year in 1990 was another way of getting it out there.
Yeah. No, I think I remember, Sam, the story about the 60-minute piece, and I have that documentary, and I'll have to find it and put it on the YouTube channel. I remember that Dr. Yunus, he did an annual sort of celebration. So all his clients came, and they had just finished it a week before, and then he heard about 60-minute. Right. Dr. Yunus, one of his greatest strengths was he was an excellent communicator. So he then said, yeah, sure. He reorganized that event. Yeah. And that really was his vision to communicate to the masses that really got him, that got the first, sort of focus on microfinance in a way that nobody else had achieved. And so from the challenges that you talked about, that people were resistant to the idea, and Senator, what's his name? Distancini. What was, tell us a little bit about what are the factors of the resistance and how to pass this legislation around microfinance. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I don't know really what to say about USAID, for example, in 2022, but in 1987, it was you can't make tiny loans. They don't know what to do with it. You need a lot of technical assistance. It's too much paperwork. Just nothing about it felt doable. And in fact, I'm going to skip ahead a second. A couple of years later, we did a study of the top 10 aid recipient countries, what's happened with the microenterprise funds, and found that in Jordan, the loans were between $15,000 and $20,000 each, rather than under $300. And that prompted the 3 lead sponsors to commission a GAO study from the Government Accounting Office. So there was all these different pressures. I want to read, if I can find it, I think it's right here. On September 23rd, 8 of the 13 Senate Foreign Operations Subcommittee members signed a letter to the chair and ranking member of the Subcommittee of Appropriations, urging inclusion of the microcredit bill in their bill. On October 15th, a New York Times editorial appeared titled, "Where $100 Goes a Long Way." That was what the name of the editorial was. And it said, quote, "Loan amounts proposed under the pending legislation are too modest to attract the barracudas that usually circle foreign aid. The poor will receive the aid directly and have a chance through their own initiative to become self-sufficient. That sounds a lot like the American way, end of quote. But the point is, that was an editorial generated in the New York Times by a results volunteer. And the lead sponsor, Ed Feehan, was generated by a results volunteer, and on and on and on. They were just the volunteers who were getting educated and trained and empowered to do this work. So there was the legislation, there was the oversight report, and then comes next in a way is the microcredit summit.
So the legislation, for the audience, what was the objective of the legislation? Can you define that, Sam? Just a little bit.
Let me say this, the legislation in full form never passed. What passed was $50 million for microenterprise development, and in report language, which is not, it's a report, it's not like required, but they're asking that that the funds, I could figure out, if you'll take me 1 second. The bottom line is the majority of the funds was to go to people in the bottom half of the country economically, with an emphasis on women and the bottom 20%. That was the essential element of it. It's that the head of AID many months later said, we're implementing the letter and spirit of the law. And when he said that, that allowed us to then, well, so let's see if they're implementing the letter and spirit of the law, which is reaching women, reaching the poorest, and loans for self-employment, rather than for someone who could hire 15 or 20, or it's not like that shouldn't happen, but that was the only thing that was happening in a sense with USAID.
This is, which year is this, Sam? That
Well,
this
is
happened?
87, 80.
87, okay.
Yeah.
So it's really earlier on, right? We didn't have that the first microcredit.
No, that's 10 years later.
A decade later. So what happened in that decade? Did you go to Grameen? Did you? So how did your relationship develop?
Yeah, you know, our first trip of results volunteers was 1990. 45 volunteers paid their own way and went to Bangladesh, mostly from the US, but also from Canada and Australia and UK. And they broke us up into like 13 groups of 3 or 2 or whatever it was. And we went to 13 different districts. And we spent a week essentially in the villages. We'd visit about 4 or 5, they'd visit 4 or 5, they'd visit 4 or 5. So it was not like, take us to your best one.
Yeah.
They took us all over. I mean, and it was remarkable. It was very remarkable.
And so then so I presume when you visited, you met with Dr. Yunus and you continued that relationship. And I presume Alex was still there, or was he doing his Fulbright thing at that time? Alex Counts?
He was still there. What do I want to say? Clinton was elected in 92. I guess he started in 93. And George Stephanopoulos was one of his key aides. And they worked out a thing where there was an agreement between the Congress and the AID and the administration. I don't know if it was like 250 million a year back in by 83, 84, 85, somewhere in there. And it was Hillary Clinton's college roommate, Jan Piercy, who introduced the Clintons to Muhammad Yunus. I mean, when Clinton was running for president, he was quoted in Rolling Stone interview that he did that Muhammad Yunus should win the Nobel Prize. And the journalist says, I don't know any candidates for president who've ever heard of Muhammad Yunus. how do you know of this kind of thing? But so there was those kinds of things that were going on then. How it gets to the Microcredit Summit is John Hatch, who was the founder of Finca, was on our board, as was Muhammad Yunus, and the results board. And John Hatch wrote a paper. I think he sometimes described it as he was on a long flight and the libations were flowing. And he wrote a paper, a 6-page paper about a microcredit summit with a goal of reaching 200 million. And we spoke with Yunus about it, and they agreed that no, it'd be a little more, it'll be smarter if the goal was to reach 100 million of the world's poorest families, especially the women, with credit for self-employment and other financial and business services by 2005. That was the goal. And the Microcredit Summit was in 1997. There had already been 6 UN summits: the Children's Summit, the Earth Summit, the City Summit, the Food Summit, etc. And so we were after those 6. And they were UN summits, and we were a civil society organized summit. So summit fatigue could have been a big problem, but we had 2,000 registered before the summit happened. So we printed enough materials for 2,500 in case 500 registered on site, but 900 registered on site. There were 2,900 from 137 countries. There were 11 Secret Service details because there were 5 presidents and prime ministers, 5 first ladies, the Queen of Spain, the Queen of Belgium, and 2,900 other people at this summit. And I'm going to say one other thing about it. I had noticed that all the other summits, they spend 2 weeks running around, change this sentence, add this phrase, fix this thing in the document. And we were going to have a summit where the document was complete. And to get in, you had to join one of the Council of UN agencies, or the Council of Microfinance Practitioners, or the Council of whatever, banks and commercial finance institutions. And so we took John Hatch's original 6-page paper and sent it to a list of 200 for feedback. And by the end, we were sending a 50-page document mailing to 2,000 people because it was 1996 and hardly anyone had an email address, much less attachments or whatever. So it was way back then. And I'll tell you one other thing about it. Our core themes are reaching the poorest, reaching and empowering women, building financially self-sufficient institutions. And then I was speaking in the UK and I got clobbered. Who cares if all that happens if there's no impact? And so that was obvious, we assumed that, but we added ensuring a positive measurable impact on the lives of clients and their families. That was the 4th core theme that was added before the summit happened in 1997. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, I remember Gary, who attended, Gary Haram, a great guy who attended summit, and you know him well. He told me that you actually, at the end were singing together, Kumbaya. I mean, I've never been to a summit.
What it was this is like, it's where the World Bank used to have its annual meetings at the Wardman Hotel in DC. And we had, before every plenary, we had like on this massive screen, a borrower story. Rob Roy had been going around the world doing videos, and he did a borrow story of a woman from Bolivia and a borrow story of a woman from India, and it's on and on. And at one point, he did a borrower story from a woman and then a group at Sewa in India. Yeah. And in part of their gathering, they sang "We Shall Overcome" in Gujarati. And so we ended the summit with that video, and the women were singing "We Shall Overcome" in Gujarati, and the curtain went up, and there was a gospel choir on stage, and they
oh wow, very powerful.
in English. And you see like the president of the World Bank and holding hands. That was sort of kumbaya.
Yeah, right.
I want to just read 2 paragraphs of Muhammad Yunus's speech at the Microcredit Summit. He said, "Life leads us in mysterious ways and calls us to achieve our greatest potential in a manner we can never predict or know in advance. Microcredit borrowers who grow up accepting that they are nobody, they are worth nothing, were placed by this summit in the global spotlight and held up as the great heroes in the fight for world development. Speaker after speaker," no, this is in his book, it's not what he said. "Speaker after speaker lauded them for their endless patience and skill in micromanaging tiny pieces of resources to craft a life with dignity. In teaching economics, I learned about money. And now as the head of a bank, I lend money. And the success of our venture lies in how many crumpled bank bills our once starving members now have in their hands. But the microcredit movement, which is built around and for and with money, ironically, is at its heart, at its deepest root, not about money at all. It's about helping each person achieve his or her fullest potential. It's not about cash capital, it's about human capital. Money is merely a tool that helps unlock the human dreams and helps even the poorest and most unfortunate people on this planet achieve dignity, respect, and meaning in their lives. So that was from his book about the Microcredit Summit, not what he said at it.
No, I think the human capital really is really the center of it. And talking about all these, prior to the microfinance was all these large money going to government, inherently corrupt. And microfinance revolution was that it was going to the individual, so it has a lot more efficiency. And I think there's a lot of young people that are listening to these. I just got a message from a young lady that she's, she finds them, for her, she's just getting started. So I want to tell that young lady that, what the the person at USAID that Sam earlier talked about, and, the Nano Kleipiter, who was became the CEO of FMO, one of the really, innovative sort of development organization. He told me once that, when they were starting to bring out cell phones, the Grameen phone idea, this Grameen phone, for those who don't know, was really a revolutionary idea of giving women cell phone so they can connect with the world. And at that time, all the gurus in development, so when you see the young, addressing the audience here, the younger ones, were trying to do innovative things, and people are telling them, it's just in the development banks, and you think they are all right. Nano told me that they were poo-pooing this idea, that what is the hell, what the hell is this? This is all consumption. What is the women, look at what, the micro loans of the cell phones and the technology around cell phones and all the fintech phenomena came from the phones which were being pooed by the development banks, and they thought they had no utility whatsoever. So I just wanted to highlight that element of it.
The green start of the cell phones was around the Microcredit Summit, maybe the year before, 96 or something. And Yunus was saying that they had some consultants come in and say, well, the reach of cell phones in Bangladesh would be 500,000 because they counted the number of color TVs in Bangladesh and said that would be about equal to the number of cell phones. I mean, when he said that, they had 15 million Grameen phone users at the time. But he told me this story about being in a village with a cell phone lady. And he said to them, people on the outside don't think you can do this. And the woman said to him, give me a number to dial and I'll dial it. And if I don't do it right, you can have the phone back. He said, no, I believe you. She said, blindfold me and give me a number to dial. And if I don't do it right, you can have the phone back. He said, no, I trust that you can do it. I just was telling you that people on the outside doubt whether you can.
Yeah. So, Sam, we are at we've made lots of stride in terms of the microcredit, the mothership of impact investing. It's transformed, and now you have impact investing as the word that is being used. What do you think in your, what role should development banks play now that you had experience with them? How do you think to move the industry even further? What are the key elements you think that could help, sort of catapult the development of financing towards the bottom of the pyramid and, empowering the poor?
Yeah, well, let me just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And related to I don't know is I've returned to my advocacy work 10 years ago. So I haven't been deeply in the field for at least a decade. I guess I first was involved with the microfinance. Well, if you go back to 87, it's on to 35 years ago or something. But let me say it a different way. And I don't know if this is useful toward the question you asked. In my mind, the grandchild of the microcredit summit movement is the ultra poverty work initiated by BRAC. That whatever that does, whatever that intends to do, that really was in some sense, the spirit of what we were trying to do in 1985, 86, 87, and in some ways, what we were trying to do in getting the microcredit summit up and rolling in 95, 96, 97 kind of thing. The bottom line is, are the ultra poor going to be left behind? That's my question. That's my impact question.
Sure.
And will that happen because of our continued failure, basically, to address what's possible with those who are most vulnerable? I remember in this chapter in my book, Eunice describes looking for the first clients in a village or going to another village as looking for the most timid, which I would never think of. I would look for the most aggressive. Describes the night before she gets her first loan. This is 35 years ago, is the worst night of her life. She's tossing and turning. Can she do it? Can she pay it back? I would have thought it would have been the best night of her life. And turning things on their head. And his response to me about when I remember I was in New York City, it was an interaction conference, US agencies working around the world. And someone asked, what was your strategy in forming Grameen Bank? And he said, I didn't have a strategy. I just kept doing what was next. But when I look back, my strategy was whatever banks did, I did the opposite. If banks lent to the rich, I lent to the poor. If banks lent to men, I lent to women. If banks made large loans, I made small ones. If banks required collateral, my loans were collateral free. If banks required a lot of paperwork, my bank was illiterate friendly. If you had to go to the bank, my bank went to the village. Yeah, that was my strategy. Whatever bank did, I did the opposite. And that kind of, revolutionary thinking is what's needed. And I would look for those revolutionaries, if that's the word, in international development and in literacy or in health or in water and sanitation or in wherever. Who are those people that are thinking differently and as a result causing breakthroughs and causing things to happen that people imagine was not possible?
Right. Your concern for the ultra poor, right? And this sort of the idea of impact investing sort of, not going down. I remember that Dr. Yunus had a program for beggars, he started lending to the beggars. But so do you think that, where can we sort of think about the service towards the ultra poor, and do the foundations and development banks have a role? I mean, can they allocate some resources that are higher risk for that segment, or do you have any
Well, let me
views on
say it
that?
a different way. I think there was a question 25, 30 years ago. Well, the banks or the world banks or the you name it banks, couldn't they, or the high net worth individuals, couldn't they just allocate a small percentage to development or microfinance or whatever? And my same question of impact investors,
Sorry.
couldn't there just be a very tiny portion that goes to the more difficult to reach, the more vulnerable, the most vulnerable, that kind of thing? So.
Yeah, I guess the common sort of the thing is that you pick the easiest fruit first, and then you go towards the more difficult things to do. Do you still believe
if I could interrupt,
room for both at the same time?
Let me say it another way. I would say, but somebody out there isn't grabbing for the low-hanging fruit in sanitation. Find that person too. Somebody isn't grabbing for the low-hanging fruit in literacy or whatever.
Yeah.
Know that there are people out there who are inventive and are able to make it really work with not the low-hanging fruit, and find those people. I always, I'm going back 25 years again too on the research. It's like, I remember there's a study done of this group in India, and they found that they weren't reaching the poor. That wasn't the group's mission.
Yeah.
Why don't you study the renegades and the breakthrough people and the whatever? But anyway.
Yeah, that's some of the work that Ashoka, does, Bill Drayton has done some work in that area. I think I'll end this interesting conversation, Sam, and thanks for coming and talking about this, is that what would your advice be for younger people that are, suffering through the rejections and what would you tell young people? You struggled through your results movement, you struggled and achieved successes.
Again, it's like, what's your vision? I started in music. My degree from Wharton was not a degree from Wharton. I don't have a degree from Wharton. It's from the University of Miami School of Music. I mean, it's like, it's what's your passion, and find someone who's doing your passion and study with them. Is some group in Guatemala or some group in Kenya or some group wherever doing close to or your passion? Be mentored by them and emerge able to fulfill on the passion and mission that you see for yourself. And if you don't see it quite yet, go out and check it out. Go see what you can find to be clear about the direction you want to take.
Passion is an important element of not giving up. I'll just tell one story because I'm so proud of it. This was when Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, they announced the 30 million, and I had asked a question to Warren Buffett about why doesn't he think business can help, because his view was that you should just, I make money and I'll give. But he responded back to me and he said, you obviously seem like you will be very successful because you obviously have a lot of passion. And I think I remember that, that what he said is that if you really want to do something, that you have to, life is so short, money is never enough. So I think if you really pursue the purpose with sincerity and hard work, you will get, at least if you don't, even if you fail, your soul would be successsort So thank you so much, Sam. I really appreciate that time. It was great to reminisce and learn and, sort of remember all the things that have happened on the foundations of great people. And even, Dr. Yunus is before him, there were people like, nobody knows about, like Akhtar Hamid Khan, who was in Comilla and was starting this cooperative movement. And, Shafiq died recently, Shafiq Chaudhry, he passed away. And so there's so many great people that, we all stand on somebody's shoulder. So one shoulder is Sam Daley-Harris.
I mean, Shafiq Chaudhry came to the first microcredit summit, and it was his first time, certainly to the United States. It might have been his first time out of Bangladesh. And the summit was in February 2nd through 5th, 1997. And it was cold and a little snow on the ground. And I remember it was not the easiest in that front for him, but he was a brilliant guy.
Great. He was a revolutionary. Really, his movement started by sort of empowering the poor, and then he saw that what was really also empowering the poor was giving them money to empower themselves. So I worked closely with Shafiq. So I was very sorry to. But anyway, thank you so much, Sam, and thank you. And for the audience, if you have any suggestions for people or questions you would like me to ask people when I'm interviewing them, please let me know, and I would love to do that. Have a nice weekend.
Yes, and people can reach me at civiccourage.org. If you go to civiccourage.org, there's a way to reach out to me there.
Maybe, Sam, what we didn't cover is what are you doing now? Because you helped me, and I want just people to know what you're doing right now.
Well, oversimplified, I coach groups in helping empower their volunteers beyond mouse click, not transactional advocacy, sign this petition, transaction complete, but transformational advocacy, where the advocate, the volunteer, is coached, encouraged, and succeeds at doing things they never imagined possible, like having their letter to the editor published and turning on a member of Congress. And I'm just going to give you one quick example.
Sure, please.
When we first were lobbying on oral rehydration therapy, a mixture of sugar, salt, and water that the British medical journal, The Lancet, called the medical advance of the century back in the early 80s, I was like, why have I never heard of this? And then Results got to put it out there and make it known, kind of thing. I'm working with this group right now, the Foundation for Climate Restoration. Their focus is not so much putting less carbon into the atmosphere, but removing carbon from the atmosphere and sequestering it in concrete. And I'm watching an hour and 20-minute video on panel discussion. I'm going, why have I never heard of this? And it's just exciting to work with groups that are meeting with their elected officials and the media to push these different innovations forward.
Thank you so much, Sam, and we'll talk again. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.